Welcome to Coffee and Geography, where my guests and I geek out about the world and everything on it, discovering that we are all geographers in some way, shape or form. I'm your host, Kit, and my pronouns are they, them or she, her. So settle down with a brew, hit that subscribe or follow button, and enjoy the listen. Hello everybody, so I've got up this morning and I was a bit cranky. This is all relevant. Got the kids out of bed, into school, finished the dregs of their breakfast, and while doing that, this person has just finished up their entire day because they're on the other side of the world, down under. And I welcome to the podcast Professor John Cook. How are you doing, John?
G'day, Kit. Great to talk to you.
Oh yes, there it is, the g'day.
Well, you mentioned being on the other side of the world, so it was a gratuitous Aussie interjection there.
John, I have to get the elephant in the room out of the way first. Are you a cricket fan?
Huge cricket fan. I've been monitoring the Ashes. Although I was watching the highlights from day one of the second test this morning when I wake up, catch up on the cricket highlights. Was actually disturbed to see Bairstow carrying a protester off the field. Like, do they not have security to do that kind of thing? But anyway,
yeah, folks, if you're not interested into cricket, right, I understand if you skip the next 2 minutes or something like that, right? You know, but I am definitely like that song. I don't like cricket. I love it, right? Well, especially when the Ashes and stuff like that are on. And England just threw away the first test, I felt. Australia made a fantastic start to the second one, even been put in the bat. But the talking point, which is relevant for John being here, because I'll introduce John, is that there was a Just Stop Oil protester who ran onto the field yesterday and was carried off by wicketkeeper Johnny Bairstow. So he had his mitts full with an orange protester. But and that is because, folks, that's relevant because John is a scientist who researches how to fight fake news. And before becoming a scientist, he was a cartoonist. And so now he combines his science and art in the Cranky Uncle game. You definitely need to check that out. We'll talk about that a bit later. Using humour, cartoons, critical thinking, and games to build resilience against misinformation. And his passion is climate change, working to reduce the impact of climate change on the world and people. So that is why yesterday two of your worlds collided: cricket and the climate change protest. Yeah. There's too much focus on the protester with these things. So we've had it in the snooker, we've had it in the cricket, we've had it in the rugby. So what do you think about all this then, John?
As well as art galleries as well.
Yes, of course.
Whole, just a sequence of protesters throwing various substances onto very famous paintings. I have mixed feelings about it because on the one hand, I share their concerns about climate change and feel like we urgently need to act on climate change. But at the same time, how we do that is important. If the point of protest is to raise awareness and try to get the public on board, you're trying to bring them with you, doing alienating acts can be counterproductive. So, fully agree with the sentiment, but sometimes the actions concern me if they alienate the public more than bring them on board in becoming concerned about climate change.
It's such a tricky balance for these folks, isn't it? I mean, like Just Stop Oil and Extinction Rebellion. And we know that those folks get a lot of bad press for what they do. And what you don't see on the fringes is a lot of people. I have quite a few friends, for example, who are in Extinction Rebellion East, which is here in the east of England, and the majority of them do a lot of work behind the scenes, like information, education, not so much direct action. So the direct action, really, folks, is what you see is really just the tip of the iceberg of all the activism that's going on underneath. And so I can see where you're coming from, John, because I think to myself, the direct action is, the argument is they would say is you have, we had massive floods with the massive downpours here in the UK a week ago, just after the breaking of the heat. and it caused flooding and people couldn't get around on the M25, so the M25 is bad enough as it is, but have it flooding and stuff like that, so people couldn't drive. They're saying, well, look, this is this potential disruption with climate change, and you're having a go at a few protests on the road. So that's their argument. The other side of the argument, of course, is that all these people are doing this work in the background feel, well, is our message being undermined by the actual direct action activists? So it's a tricky balance. It's such a tricky balance. But of course, we're in a climate emergency. What do we do?
Yeah. I don't think there's any one answer, and maybe that's the point. Is that every one of us are individuals. We all have our own backgrounds, talents, skills, and we should all bring what we've got to the table and use that. And if we combine all our different passions and skills and backgrounds in unique ways, then that can make a unique impact. For example, if you happen to be a cartoonist and a cognitive scientist and a do critical thinking research, combining all those different unique things in a special way can make an impact in a way that uses humor as well. Humor is another way to engage and bring people along. So, but that's just one example. I think all of us have a unique contribution to make, and we should all be thinking about, what am I passionate about? What am I good at? And how can I use that to help stop climate change?
Yeah, absolutely. And people know that I talk a lot, and that's one skill I try to use. Right, so John, usually what we do at the first part of the podcast is say what brew usually bring to the podcast. So it's the end of the day for you. You're winding down. So what brew have you got with you, or what would you usually have at this time of day?
Well, at this time of day, might have a glass of red or a cocktail, depending on if it's Friday after. If this was 24 hours from now, I would probably be making myself a margarita or a mojito, perhaps, to celebrate the end of the week.
Nice.
But also, lately we're trying to restrict our drinking to the weekends, just so that we're not taking too many calories.
Nice. Yeah. So now Australians and their wine, because here in the UK we're blessed with such a range of wines. South Africa, definitely Australia, stuff like that. Are you folks big on your own wine? Are you like we drink our own wine, like we drink our own beers, or is it a case of no, that's we export that stuff, we have something else? Dispel this myth for me,
Me personally, I enjoy Australian wine. In fact, when we were living in the US for 4 years, actually from 2017 to 2020, over the same 4 years that Trump was president, one of my favorite wines at that point, probably maybe living under the Trump administration, probably drove me to wine, but was an Australian wine, which I'd never had before. We saw it on the shelf, and it had something to do with convicts, and I forget the name of the wine now, which your English audience would probably appreciate. But that's not that's a myth. I think that Australians enjoy Australian wines.
Yeah, it's because of course wine is such a big for us anyway here in the United Kingdom. Although climate change is making it, and I don't think there are no net positives to climate change. But I've seen answers in kids' exam questions say, "But a positive of climate change is that the UK can now grow wines." I'm like, oh my god, it's like really, and compared to everything else, but we're obviously an importer of wine. So all we ever know about wine is it's a drink of other countries. So I find it fascinating when I speak to people in certain parts of the world where we import things from them, from their culture. And of course, usually what happens is that they get westernized. So, the Chinese food here is not Chinese food. The Indian food here is not really Indian food. It's westernized Indian and all that kind of stuff. But with wine is wine. So I guess, do you know much about how much the climate really does influence the wine? Because I know nothing about it. I mean, I know about meteorology and climatology and stuff like that, but how it might affect the berry or something like that, or the grape, I had no idea. Do you have any inkling at all?
I equally have no idea.
Yes. No, as I say, folks, just because we know about climate doesn't mean necessarily know about how wine grows in different climates. That's a completely other science. But we're very grateful to you folks who do this science with the different various tastes of wines that we can have. So you're over there in Melbourne now, and I apologise, folks, if I do get the pronunciation this wrong. I am trying, and please do correct me. So Melbourne in Australia is on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri Wurrung and the Burong Boong Wurrung peoples. I think the Aboriginal peoples. I think I completely butchered those terms, and I do apologise. But I do like to recognise the indigenous and traditional lands that folks are on. Has Melbourne been your? Is it your place? Is it where you were born and raised? Are you from another part of Australia, another part of the world? And how does Melbourne form John Cook's identity? I mean, are you Melbourne Australian through and through, Victoria through and through? Or have you brought other identities from other locations with you to make the person you are today?
I'm a relative newcomer. When we came back to Australia from the US in 2021, it was to Melbourne, but prior to that, I grew up and lived most of my life in Queensland. So
Okay.
I'm very much a tropical Queenslander, passionate Queensland football fan. We're right in the middle of State of Origin at the moment, so I'm a bit low-key obsessed with following all the commentary about State of Origin. I don't know whether people in England are even heard of State of Origin, but it's a huge deal over here. So yeah, I'm very much a Queenslander living in Victoria.
Yeah, which of course, because Australia is effectively a continent, that's a long way away from where you are right now. So, what roughly is the distance between, for folks who don't know, the distance between where you are right now and up there in Queensland? It's a few
Yeah,
thousand miles, I imagine.
what is it? It's about a 2.5 hour flight
Whew.
from Melbourne to Brisbane, which is the very southeast of Queensland.
Mm,
Then it's another couple of hours to the north of Queensland. So
wow.
it would be about probably if I was to fly to the north of Queensland, it would be about probably a 4 or 5 hour flight.
Crikey. Yeah, and then that's not too.
Crikey.
Yeah, crikey. There you go. There's another one. You not say that down there, though, don't you? You say crikey.
I thought that was our thing. I didn't realize that it was a British term.
Now, did you take it from us or did we take it from you?
Yeah, someone will have to supply
Because I say it a lot because I've got Cockney roots because my dad is from the East End of London, so I say crikey a lot. Yeah, I have friends in Australia keep telling me that I need to come visit, but I'm like, I don't know, can I do the flight? And of course, there is a non-stop flight now between London,
Perth.
and Perth. I mean, what's that, 22 hours or something like that?
I think I seem to recall it being 21, but
Wow.
probably the longest. That would be a long flight.
Yeah. And folks, I know that John and I recognise the irony that we're both climate change educators and we're talking about flying here. So that's not lost on us, everybody. We do understand that. Right. Let's go on with climate change because there's something I really, really want to talk about. First of all, John, I want to thank you for all the work that you've done, not just with the climate stuff, but the critical thinking, using your talents as an artist as well to kind of really promote, and your work with the fantastic, helping out with the fantastic website, which is Skeptical Science. So, folks, you really do need to look at that. That's such a great one-stop shop to kind of bust myths and what I love about Skeptical Science is that you present arguments in three different levels. So I think let's start there, and then we'll move into Cranky Uncle because that's just brilliant, and we'll play a little game based on Cranky Uncle, right? So Skeptical Science. How did you get involved in that, and how did that come about, and why do you think it's so important to have those different maybe levels of accessibility when it comes to explaining the science?
So Skeptical Science began from me having arguments with my father-in-law about climate change.
I see where this is going. Okay.
So he would throw these arguments at me, and then I would go home afterwards after our family get together and research the different arguments. And being a competitive son-in-law also being a nerd, I started a database of each argument and then what the science said about each one. Basically building an encyclopedic resource to have ready, like to have the information in my head so that we're organized, so that when we next had our family get together, if an argument came up, I would, well, actually, the science says this. Eventually, I realized that other people also had family members who were skeptical about climate change that might also find that a useful resource. So I cleaned it up, organized it, and published it as the Skeptical Science website. And for a couple of years, it was just me debunking climate myths solo. Then it was actually a physicist from Sydney who emailed me and said, I've just read this blog post by Gavin Schmidt. He's the NASA climate scientist.
Yep.
Suggesting that an effective way to communicate climate change would be to communicate at multiple levels and use the metaphor of ski slope difficulty. So you have your beginner, intermediate, and advanced, like green slopes, blue slopes, black slopes. And this physicist said, you should do that with your debunkings on Skeptical Science. And I was like, wow, do you realize how much work that would be? You do want to help? And he was like, no. I'm suggesting it. You can run with it.
A suggestion, not volunteering. Yeah.
Yeah. And in fact, for years, I've been trying to get people to help and hadn't. I'd been unsuccessful. But this idea was just so compelling that eventually I just posted a blog post on Skeptical Science saying, here is this very cool idea by Gavin Schmidt. Who wants to help? Like, basically, my rebuttals are written at an intermediate level, a little bit too nerdy for the average non-scientist. Does anyone think they could do a better job at writing plain language, more basic versions? And immediately overnight, got a flood of people volunteering to help. A lot of people thought, yeah, I can do a better job than you in science. And that created the Skeptical Science community, like an author community, all working together to write content and, importantly, review each other's content to make it as accurate and well communicated as possible.
Yeah, it is a really, really fantastic resource, and it's you know, as someone who is active on social media and stuff like that, sometimes you feel like you're shouting at a brick wall. But the reason people say to me, Kit, why do you engage with the trolls? What's the point? I'm like, well, one, I'm an educator. You know, it's a habit I can't break. And the second thing is that I'm not actually replying to that troll. What I'm actually doing is that I'm providing a link, a resource to someone who is genuinely willing to learn, who is on the fence, who is not sure, who knows climate change is happening but can't quite understand what's going on. So me posting a rebuttal, a debunking, or whatever to that troll is not actually for that troll, because I know I'm never going to convince those kinds of people. It's for those people who are who are not closed-minded. So, and what I really do take a lot of stock on, actually, and I'm not quite sure, how active you are on social media, John, but I pay probably more attention to the views than I do to the likes or the retweets. Well, the retweets are important, but to the views especially. If I see, usually what happens, you get 200 something views and only like 3 likes, but 200 and some people have at least seen that tweet. So it's got to have some influence somehow. So the fact that you've worked on that and you've done that and you've put all that time and effort in and got all those volunteers, I just want to say thank you so much, because it is such an amazing resource, and it helps so much to say, look, I'm tired of giving these arguments over and over again. I'm being repetitive. It's like a broken record. But you know what? Look at this page on Skeptical Science, which addresses exactly your claim. So it's such a wonderful resource, and every teacher, every person should have it bookmarked, ready to go.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah. And of course, born from that is you thought you're going to bring some of your art into it. So before we go on to your Cranky Uncle, I want you to talk to us a little bit about your artwork and being a cartoonist, because then we can get the sense of, behind all these geeky geographers, these scientists and whatnot, there's the people who bring in their hobbies and passions as well, and their humans beings behind it too. So go on, tell us a bit about what were you like one of these kids who just used to love drawing, and then you were like formulating your own characters? How did you start to become a cartoonist? How did that happen?
So I did a physics degree initially at the University of Queensland, and during my physics lectures, I would spend a lot of time drawing cartoons. I passed, so I was still enough of the information got in that I got my degree.
Nice.
But after honors year, I was so burnt out by academia that I decided to do cartooning instead as a career, and spent the next decade or so um, drawing for a living,
I love
doing
it.
comic strips, publishing them in newspapers. Um, but while I was doing drawing for a living, then I started. That's when I started getting into skeptical science and the climate change misinformation issue. So it's kind of a funny flip. Like when I was doing science, I did cartoons as a hobby. When I was doing cartoons as a job, then I started doing science as a hobby. Um,
Ah,
and then I got pulled back into academia, doing a PhD into psychology of misinformation and how best to counter it. And one of my research studies was with some philosophers, critical thinking philosophers, who introduced to me the idea of parallel argumentation, which
mm,
is you can explain how misinformation is misleading by taking the logical flaws and transplanting it into a parallel situation
right.
using logic analogies. And I realized cartoons are the perfect delivery mechanism for that. So I dug up my old cartooning equipment and started drawing cartoons of um, the logical fallacies that I was seeing in climate misinformation, but transplanting those into absurd situations.
Wow, that is so cool. I mean, so what a roundabout way to come into it. But do you feel now you found your sweet spot then? Like because you're such a passionate communicator with science, and you're obviously learning about how the human brain works with those biases, and you're cartoonist. I mean, are you sound like you're in your sweet spot now.
Um, it's a hard question to answer
Mm,
because each step then opens up other opportunities. Like I started by doing these cartoon debunkings, and then that led to doing a Cranky Uncle book. But then the Cranky Uncle book led me to meeting some game developers and doing a Cranky Uncle game, which added gamification to it. And now we're having done a Cranky Uncle game, we're now looking at doing audio versions of the game so that people who are illiterate
mm.
can also benefit from the content. And just each step seems to open up other opportunities. So um, I guess you would call it a sweet spot in the sense that it's I do really appreciate taking different aspects of what I've done in my past history and then synthesizing them, pulling them all together in a very unique way.
Yeah. So let's move on and talk about Cranky Uncle now. So I've just loaded up my app. So there's my Cranky Uncle there.
What
Um,
level? What's your mood currently?
oh, it, I'm trying to log in at the moment. It's not letting me log in to get into my thing, maybe because I don't know what's going on there, but it's back down to 0 at the moment until I log in.
Oh, okay.
But yeah. So, folks, first of all, pause if you're not driving, if you're at home or you're listening to this podcast, right? Pause now. Go and search for Cranky Uncle on the app finder, so whether it's Apple or Google or whatever. There is a browser version as well, which is fantastic. So that's great. So you can also play it online. And if you are driving or it's unsafe to do so, please, obviously, first thing you do when you arrive at your destination. It asks you to set up an account. Now, yes, it's for gamification. You know, you're saving your scores and playing on other devices, stuff like that. But it helps with it also helps with a bit of research. Is that right? So is it anonymous data gets sent to help because of the responses that people give?
Yeah. Well, firstly, I don't think that you need to set up an account anymore on the latest
Oh,
version of the
okay.
game.
Right. Yep.
We've streamlined it so you just can go straight into playing it if you want.
Awesome.
But what the game does do when you first start playing is it says, "We're collecting research data. You do you want to participate in research?" Which is completely voluntary. If you agree, then it just asks you a few questions, showing you examples of misinformation, and you have to identify what is the misleading technique. If you then get all the way to the end of the game, it repeats that research survey. So it's just a very simple research design to measure, does the game improve people's ability to detect misinformation?
Right. That's absolutely fantastic. So what we're going to do, we're just going to do one round, and then I'm going to do a game with you, kind of. But I'm going to mesh together something I do for this podcast plus Cranky Uncle seriously we go. So right, so folks, so the first thing that you have to challenge your Cranky Uncle about when you first start the game, the first level is all about fake experts, right? And so it gives you a little bit of a description about what a fake expert is. You've got some fantastic grumpy, uncle kind of like poses going. I love how you have him posing like with his arms crossed or and I love the one with the tinfoil hat. That's brilliant as well. Right, so here we go, folks. Here's 3 options. Think about it, right? So which of these is an example of a fake expert? Professor Smith, who holds a PhD in computer science, says that climate change is not settled science. Astrophysicist Professor Jones explains how we detected a massive black hole in the center of our Milky Way galaxy. Medical researcher Dr. Clark published a scientific report on the benefits of vaccination. Right. So who is the fake expert? Because you'll hear people say, oh, this person's a scientist, this person's a researcher, this person is this person's a doctor or whatever. They must know what they're talking about. But as me and John have demonstrated earlier in this chat, just because we know a little bit about climate doesn't necessarily we know how wine is grown. Yep. So we are fake experts. People are realizing what I do here. Sometimes my ADHD is a benefit, John. I can make links to waffle I said before. And of course, the answer is, folks, is the computer scientist saying that climate change is not settled. The most convincing computer science will say, well, yeah, I'm a computer. I know how modeling works, projection works. I know how a computer algorithm works. Yeah, and they're going to sound convincing as an expert, but because they don't know and haven't studied the mechanics of climate and atmospheric physics and dynamics and stuff like that, and how you apply that within a climate model, they are not an expert. Okay, so that's a fantastic example. That language, John, is brilliant because if I was still teaching high school, I would certainly be using that with the youngest kids minimum. You like the 11, 12-year-olds, year 7s and whatnot, because the language on that is very, very good. So, yes, you talked to us about accessibility. So you're hoping to have an audio version. Are you going to voice it? Are you going to be the Cranky Uncle?
Oh no, actually, we've already got some voice samples just over the last week.
Cool.
Definitely not voicing it because the game is actually being put together by an organization in Ghana in Western Africa.
Oh, right, cool.
And so they obviously got Ghana actors to do all the voice work.
Nice.
And in 6 different dialects, English and 5 local dialects. So
that's amazing.
But they sent us samples and they're just wonderful, especially the uncle. The uncle was just so expressive and hilarious.
There's something about folks in that part of the world. I mean, I've got friends a lot further south in Malawi, and there's something about how they express their enthusiasm which is infectious. I think you're onto a winner there, John. And I tell you what, a lot of people are really going to enjoy what you said about having it done in local dialects, because of course that is so important to have that done, to have it done in those local and native languages, because they always get forgotten. And of course, as we know, when we look at the IPCC reports, one of the major criticisms of the IPCC report is that it's always in English. I mean, you do have sometimes people who locally translate it, but it's only ever in the major languages, and so it's not accessible for many people.
I agree 100% that we want to make the game as accessible to as many different people as possible, and there's 2 versions of the game. There's the original Cranky game, that's what you're playing right now, and then there's an upcoming new vaccine version of the game that we're doing with UNICEF. That's the one that's being it was co-designed in Africa and developed in and being translated into those different Ghana local dialects. But even the classic version of the game has been translated into French, German, Spanish, Portuguese. I think that Macedonian is coming up soon.
Wow!
So
yeah, cool.
I don't know how many people speak Macedonian, but they'll have access to that game shortly. But there's a lot of content in that game, and therefore the translation job is big. but the volunteers who do it just do it because they're passionate about this issue, and so we really appreciate all the volunteers who help make the translations possible.
Well, that's amazing. So that's brilliant, folks. So it's a true citizen science kind of thing, contribute a sustainable thing, because without that social aspect of our push towards environmental sustainability, then it's not gonna be effective. So that's amazing, John. Hi folks, a chance for you to recharge your brew, but also a polite prod to remind you that it's so easy to support this podcast. Simply liking, sharing, rating and reviewing means that it will get on more people's radar. Also, there are a few links down in the description which may be of mutual benefit. Please do check them out. Right, so here's the game, right? I've got one of my favourite things I like to use in my training is something called 20 cognitive biases that screw up your decisions. It's a Business Insider graphic. And the reason why I love it is because they set out the 20 biases like a card shape. So what I did in the past was I printed them out, cut them out, and I used to use them to help people think about their biases. So what I'm going to do is that I've got a random number generator, 1 to 20, because there's 20 biases. And I'm going to play a different version of Jog On. So what I usually do with Jog On is I generate five random topics, and you can talk about 3 of them and pass on 2 of them. All right. So this time I'm going to roll this random number generator 5 times. It will give me a bias, and you can either choose to talk about it, and you can frame it in terms of climate change if you want, or anyway, whatnot, or you can pass. So if you want to talk about it, you say jog on, Kit. If you want to pass it, you say take a hike. So you ready? Yeah. So I'm going to roll this random number generator, everybody. So it's coming up with 17. So 17, John, is selective perception. So this is allowing our expectations to influence how we perceive the world. In an experiment involved a football game between students from 2 universities showed that one team saw the opposing team commit more infractions. So would you like to jog on about that one, or take a hike and move on to something else?
I'll jog on about that one.
Go for it. Selective perception.
There's another study which I think is has the same bias, which was it was a video where there was all these students in white shirts, white clothes, just throwing a ball between themselves. And participants were instructed count how many times they catch the ball, and there's like 2 or 3 balls. So you really have to concentrate on watching these balls, like 2 or 3 balls moving around at the same time, and counting how many times they're thrown. And while this is happening, a person in a gorilla suit just walks into the middle of the crowd and then walks out. And afterwards, the researcher asked, "Did you see the gorilla?" And I don't think anyone or very few people saw the gorilla because they were so concentrating on the balls. And so it just tells us that our capacity to miss things, even in our direct line of sight, is incredibly powerful if we're really concentrating our attention somewhere. Yeah. And I wrote an article, and I wrote it a number of years ago. So if I need to find it, I just Google gorilla blowfish climate change, and it'll come up. And the article is about how misinformation can take advantage of this selective attention by distracting people onto just specific things in order to miss the bigger picture. So, and the example I use is from our own experience. We published a study that found 97% consensus on climate change, and we replicated it. We found the same result as lots of other studies. It was a very robust result, but our critics hyper focus on very narrow little parts of the study, saying, well, what about this little bit here? And the thing was, all of that, like hyper focusing on all these tiny little methodological nitpicks, was distracted from the fact that our study was consistent with other studies. Everyone were using different methods and coming to the same results, which is how science works. When science independently comes to the same conclusions, that's when you can be confident. But it was all about distracting people from this larger picture by trying to hyper focus their attention on the narrow little nitpicks.
Well,
That was a longer answer than you probably
oh,
expect.
fantastic, and that's perfect, John. Because I found the article, and I'm dropping that link in the show notes for people to read. So yeah, so I found it. So it's what do gorilla suits and blowfish fallacies have to do with climate change? Excellent. What a great start. Right. And I don't use that video anymore because too many people know about it now. So it's done the rounds now. Right. So random number is generated again, and we're coming up to 14. So 14th. Oh, this is an interesting one. So you can skip it or you can talk about it. It's the pro-innovation bias. When a proponent of innovation tends to overvalue its usefulness and undervalue its limitations. Sounds familiar, Silicon Valley? So you can jog on that or you can take a hike. Pro-innovation bias.
Okay, I'm probably I'll jog on with this one. And
Okay.
I don't know whether I'm missing the point, but that description you just gave reminds me of a study, and this is a different bias again, but it sort of manifested in the same way. People were shown an article about a nuclear power accident, and
Okay.
and people responded to the article in two different ways, depending on their background. If they were supportive of nuclear power, they were like, well, there was an accident, but see how they recovered from it, and that shows that that we can trust nuclear power. Whereas the people who began with the background of being against it were like, yeah, this shows that it's not safe. So there was this, I guess, the pro-innovation bias. It's not really. I think I'm missing the point, but was just underplaying the limitations or dangers of nuclear power and focusing instead on the fact that they managed to recover from the crisis.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think I probably should have passed on that because that's a completely different bias.
But you've given a fantastic example, nevertheless. And so when I think of pro-innovation bias, I'm thinking I just have two words: Elon Musk. Thinks unproven, tested technologies are the answer to everything.
But he's also a bit of a scaremonger about AI as well, saying we need to shut down all AI. So he's kind of an anti-innovation when it comes to
weird. Yeah, so weird.
Quite selective in which technologies the ones that he's doing that he will profit from. He's all about.
So that's vested interest. What would that be as well? Vested. What else? What's the other word for it? Well, sort of like confirmation, only going with the stuff that he agrees with. Right.
What's that saying? You can't convince someone of something if their paycheck depends on it.
Yes, that's it. I think Al Gore popularized that in Inconvenient Truth back in the day, in the early mid 2000s. Right, number 3 is the bandwagon effect. So I probably don't need to describe this one, but you may have heard of it, folks, as groupthink or sheep pool. So the bandwagon effect, are you going to jog on or take a hike on that one?
All right, I'll jog on, and then I've used up my quota. But
you have, yeah,
because I've been accused of this one.
Okay,
because a lot of my early work was about, and this was really the main focus of my PhD research, was about scientific consensus. So it was about establishing that there was overwhelming agreement amongst climate scientists that humans were causing global warming. And one of the criticisms of us communicating the scientific consensus was the argument that science isn't done by consensus. Science is based on evidence. And so we were basically promoting a bandwagon effect. Like, it was a consensus is only there because of groupthink, or scientists are just all agreeing with each other because that's how they get their paychecks, or it's that previous bias we just talked about.
Yeah, folks. So, I mean, you can't see it because it's a podcast, but I'm face palming. Oh yeah, I get accused of that all the time. I get accused. Oh, you're just another. You're just following the money. I was like, folks, if I made money from this, You know, I wouldn't need to work, but I don't. I do it for the passion. Right. So the two that you've skipped by default then is number 16 and 7, which would have been salience, which is where you only tend to focus on things that are most recognizable to you. And number 7, confirmation bias, which is probably the most talked about one, where you only really take in information which backs up your own perceptions, preconceptions, and ideals. Fantastic. So do check that out, folks. So Cranky Uncle, brilliant. You know, it's such a simple tool. Do use it in your teaching. Have a play of it yourself. Share it with other people. You've got this vaccine one coming out soon as well, so keep an eye out for that. And yeah, and then I'll put the links to everything in the description. Right, that was brilliant, John. But we're going to do 2 more things now to finish off. The first thing is you're going to spill the beans, and I'm really looking forward to talking about this, because your creative talents don't just lie in drawing. Apparently, they lie in writing as well, because you say here, John, that you are currently in the process of writing some cli-fi. So you've got you're obsessed with the fantasy genre, and you know there's definitely a geography angle in fantasy. And I've shown to many guests my Atlas of Middle Earth. I'm in the process of writing a cli-fi fantasy, which involves working with a Bristol-based climate scientist to build a climate model of my fictional fantasy world. I wonder if I know this Bristol person. I know a few folks in Bristol, but anyway, that sounds amazing. Oh, right, okay. What made you think I'm gonna dabble in a bit of writing? I'm gonna do some cli-fi because this is really interesting.
It started after watching Don't Look Up.
Oh, what a great movie!
Yeah, I mean, I
Yeah.
loved it. In fact, I felt like it was kind of describing my life for the last 10, 15 years. And but then being a climate communication academic, I started nitpicking the analogy, like the asteroid equals climate change analogy, and thinking, well, there are certain ways that the analogy doesn't line up. And I thought, is it possible to do a cli-fi story like that with a better fitting analogy? And at the same time, I started rereading the Wheel of Time books by Robert Jordan.
Okay.
Because the Amazon was about to do the Wheel of Time series, and I needed to. I remembered how complicated the story was, so I needed to do some background reading for so the very nerdy kind of reason to do homework before watching a streaming show, and that just kind of reignited my love of fantasy, having grown up reading Lord of the Rings and Raymond Feist and David Eddings and all those fantasy books. And so I thought maybe you could do a cli-fi in a fantasy setting where because the problem with Don't Look Up was an asteroid is meant to be the metaphor for climate change, but an asteroid destroys the world on Tuesday at 3 p.m., whereas climate change happens over decades. And so there's that problem. You can kind of, but there's no way to get around that because it's sci-fi. It's you can't change the laws of physics. You can in a fantasy world. You can use magic and basically make up the rules and then shape the metaphor to fit to fit climate change. So I started writing a story, designing a fantasy world and a magic system that could then be a metaphor for climate change. The problem was once I started writing the story, I realized that I understood why the metaphor often falls apart because the story trumps the metaphor. Eventually, you have to make compromises so that the story is engaging and powerful and makes sense. And so, yeah, I'm still working through that process now. But the other thing I realized was some of my favorite fantasy stories. There's the author, again, this is that theme of author bringing what they bringing their thing. They brought their thing to it to make it so powerful. Tolkien was a linguist and a scholar, and he brought all of that scholarship to creating all the languages for
Yeah.
Middle Earth and then building the histories for where the languages came from.
Yeah. And someone,
George,
for all intents and purposes, had eco anxiety as well.
right? Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of ecological themes in his stories as well. Like I've read articles on is Lord of the Rings cli-fi? Can we retroactively, And I don't know. That's kind of an academic question, but certainly Tolkien as a person, was dismayed by the way that like industrialization was destroying the landscapes that he loved. And then George R.R. Martin and Tolkien, I love both those worlds because they're so rich and detailed, and that richness comes from their background. And so I thought, well, if I want to write a cli-fi fantasy, it just made sense that you having spoken at length to climate scientists from Bristol, Dan Lunt specifically, who created a climate model of Middle Earth. And then some of his colleagues at Bristol then went on and just nerded it up, creating climate models of Arrakis from Dune, and other fantasy worlds. I forget what the other ones were. And so I approached him and said, would you be interested, if I had a fictional fantasy world, would you be interested in building a climate model, working out how the climate would work in all the different parts of the world, and then using those details to shape the story. And so it's been a very long process like that. I basically had to create a map of an entire globe, and not just all the land features like the elevation at every point of the world, but they said this is going to be a atmosphere land ocean model. So I had to create the depths of all the oceans. I had to research what do continental shelves and steppes look like, and basically create the elevation from the tip of every mountain all the way to the bottom of every ocean.
What? That is incredible. Literal world building. And I mean, I can tell now why everyone always struggles with the question I put on the form about, can you say something as non-geographical as possible? And you were just like, no, I can't. I'm doing sci-fi, because like you have to build the geography like in order to make that work. And yeah, before you can, well, that makes perfect sense, because now I'm thinking, when you got climate models, what are the components to it? So you've got the atmospheric component, the oceanic component, you've got the land masses, you've got currents, and then before you know it, you've got all these different elements that you cannot be missing at all if you're going to be projecting climate. And so that makes perfect. But wow, that is so exciting. I tell you what, John, not only am I going to be looking forward to this book, but then whenever you get around to finishing it, sounds like it's going to be a labor of love. But wow, you'd be able to get something out of the behind the scenes of that book as well, I think.
Yeah, well, what I loved about Dan Lunt's modeling of Middle Earth was he used that, obviously a very nerdy labor of love, but he used it as a way to do some really cool climate communication, because his day job is building models of other planets, like in the solar system or wherever, and so it was organic. And the idea there is that climate models are just based on fundamental physics, laws of physics, and therefore it can be applied to Jupiter or to Mars, but you could also apply those same principles to Middle Earth. So he used this this fun labor of love as a way to communicate how climate models work, and just how we can use physics and use computers to build our understanding of the world.
Oh, you two are men after my own heart, I tell you, because one thing that I did when I used to teach about hazards was, for the lesson about responding to hazards, I brought in, and I'm not sure how popular it was in Australia, but I brought in International Rescue, the Thunderbirds, Jerry Anderson's puppet show, and I did a whole lesson about responding to an earthquake, and I had to get the information from Thunderbird 5, all the information to send Thunderbird 1 out to do the initial survey and what they need, and then they to decide what equipment to put in a Thunderbird 2, and I had all my models in and everything like that. yeah, this is speaking right to my heart, John. I'm so excited for you and how it comes out, and please do, keep us posted on your progress, because I think a lot of people listening are going to be like, I'm looking out for that. I'm going to look out for that. So
Here's a
thanks
little
for
tip
sharing that.
then, because in case I
Go for
do
it.
forget to let you know when there's developments, if you go to
Yep.
johnfocook.com, you can
Yep.
sign up to get notifications if there's ever an
Excellent.
update on this story. I've never sent an update yet because it's still percolating away, but sometime months or years into the future, whoever has signed up to get a
Yeah.
notification will be the first to learn when something happens.
Oh, I love it. I love it. It'd be like, so how are you getting on with that then, John? You were like, well, I've just working out the tectonic processes of my planet. I'm like, oh, that's awesome. Right, John. I would also point out to people, and for your reference as well, is that I did a brilliant podcast episode with a good friend of mine, Andy Plasties, and the Great Derelict podcast called cli-fi in science fiction. So climate fiction in science fiction. And basically, folks, if you just, I'll put the link in the description as well, but if you just search for Great Derelict cli-fi, you'll listen to me, Dave Wynn, and Andy talk about all these different things, like how climate change has popped its head up in climate fiction. We totally geek out. We talk about work such as The Kraken Wakes. We talk about Mad Max Fury Road, Wall-E, one of my favorite books, which is the Wind Up Girl one, and we talk about the ridiculousness of The Day After Tomorrow, Soylent Green, all that, Interstellar. So yeah, hopefully I haven't given you too much to kind of like procrastinate on there, John, and everyone else, but do check that out. Right, let's finish off then, John. So the last thing to do then is we are all geographers, which is where we link all you guests together. So last episode we spoke to David Priest, ex-geography teacher who teaches and supports geography education for Teach First here in the UK. And so he did 30 seconds talking about a word that was given to him. And John, you've got 30 seconds to talk about a word. And I try to challenge the guests to link it to something geographical. So you could link it to climate change or something like that, or you could just talk about it randomly for 30 seconds. It's completely up to you. I've lowered the bar of challenge because some people are like, So you ready for this, John?
Okay.
Here's your word for 30 seconds. It's the word synoptic.
Synoptic.
So David has given you the word synoptic. Now there is a lot, I know there's a few interpretations of the word, so you can take it however you so wish for 30 seconds, John. And then we'll get the word from you for next guest. So whenever you're ready.
This is a hard one. So synoptic, I will interpret that as a synopsis, a summary. And one of the first comments I got from Skeptical Science was someone saying, these long rebuttals that you've written, these are great, but can you just put a little synopsis at the top, a little short summary, like a paragraph? And I was like, no, I've spent all the effort writing those articles. You can damn well read them. And then eventually I thought, all right, I'll do it. This is all before the basic, intermediate, advanced. But then after I did that, I went to all that trouble. Then he replied, well, those are great, but could you also do a one-line summary? And then someone else emailed me and said, and I did do the one-sentence things. And then someone said, I love those one-sentence summaries. I'm working on a Twitter bot. Can you get them all down under 140 characters?
This is so 1984. We're eventually going to end up in single words to try and describe whole sentences, aren't we? Oh, that's excellent, John. Thank you so much. So, what word would you like to give to the following guests coming on after you? So for them to chat about for 30 seconds. It can be as random as you like. It can be based on what we've talked about. It can be something, maybe a word that might appear in your novel.
Only a single word?
Because you can't give any spoilers with a single word. It could be a very, very short phrase of 2 or 3 words.
Is the word cranky
Oh yes, let's do Cranky.
That's my way.
Let's do Cranky. Because like, if people are listening to the next episode without listening to this one, they'll be like, "Why on earth did John give that one?" And I'm just gonna have to say, "You're just gonna have to listen, aren't you, and find out." Oh, John, I've had such a delight this morning, and thank you for giving up your evening. Absolutely, it's been wonderful to talk to you and get to know you a little bit. So, folks, wishing to connect with you, where can they find you out there on the interwebs and social media and your website and stuff? Just give us a bit of a plug.
crankyuncle.com is where you can find all my critical thinking work and the game, the cartoons. And skepticalscience.com is where you can find all the climate debunkings.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And I know you gave a shout out to Dan Lunt over there in Bristol on the other side of the country to me. Is there anyone else you want to say a quick hi to?
Well, I got lots of friends in the UK. I might even be visiting Exeter in about 2 months.
Oh, you're going to Met Office?
No, it's the University of Exeter. I got some colleagues there.
No?
We're actually the machine learning researchers. We're working on detecting climate misinformation automatically. So I'm going to give a shout out to Travis Cohen at Exeter, and hope to see you in a few months, Travis.
John's coming for you, folks, down there in Exeter. Yeah, well, a lovely part of the UK. John, thanks again so much for giving up your time. It's been deeply appreciated. And just once again, thank you for all the blood, sweat, tears and love that you've given to the work that you've done. And I've just realised, folks, that I tell you what, John can answer this after I press stop record, but I forgot the obvious question, is that, John, are you going to illustrate your own novel? But John can tell me afterwards. You lot can just guess and hope what he might have said. Thanks a lot, John, for joining me.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much for listening. We hope you had fun. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe so more stories and experiences can drop into your favourite podcast app. If you fancy being a guest or have any feedback, follow us on Twitter at coffeegeogpod and send us a DM. Or you could email coffeeandgeog@geogramblings.com. Until next time, keep geogging.